welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author of a beautiful novel. It's a fiction debut, although this author has written in some other areas, and it's a remarkable debut. It's a really stunning read, and I am so excited to talk about it. So welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Yeah, hi, I'm Talya Jankovits. I'm so happy to be here. And my debut novel is The Very Unremarkable Life of Mrs. ETTY BLOOM. And it's a character-driven book that follows the life of our protagonist, ETTY BLOOM, from birth all the way to death. And explores the concept of what makes a life remarkable. This character lives a fairly ordinary and prosaic existence, and it really takes her an entire lifetime to realize that the life she lived was truly special.
I feel like that's probably a journey that a lot of us are on. So,
Yeah, yeah. I feel like that was something that I was very fascinated with, was just ordinary lives and what takes place within those ordinary experiences and moments that have lasting impressions on us personally, or maybe on those around us. And that was something that I really was excited about exploring in this book, especially because this character is Hasidic. So I loved the idea of tapping into an ordinary life that to other people might not feel familiar or ordinary to them, and sort of explore those common grounds where we can share common experiences, even though we might live very different lives within the nuances of it.
That is something that I love and that I think this book achieves very well, that balance of really richly observed cultural specificity with this, I guess, like attunement toward universal experience and what might
Yeah.
resonate like across all sorts of different boundaries. Before we get too much into the book itself, could you tell us a little bit about your career and your journey as a writer, perhaps some of your other writing?
Yeah, so I've always been writing my whole life since I was a young girl. And I did pursue an MFA program fresh out of my undergrad, went right into that, which apparently was unusual, I guess. There weren't a lot of people in an MFA program fresh out of college. And I was working on a manuscript at the time, a historical fiction book, and it was really sprawling and it was a huge endeavor, a lot of research. And when I set out to start submitting that book out, I was met with a tremendous amount of rejection, hundreds of rejections to be precise. And that took many years for me to pursue. And then finally, I put it aside and I shelved it. And I went on to write another manuscript, which I didn't pursue until I got to this third manuscript, which also went through years of rejection and hundreds of no's. But in the interim, I was constantly writing other material. So I was working a lot on creative nonfiction pieces, essays, short stories, and I did publish a collection of poetry as well during that time. So even through the constant rejection and pursuit of trying to submit the manuscripts, I was still producing other work and always writing and making those small inches forward. So it's been a career that's got a lot of maybe more downs than ups, which I think is, I like to be transparent about it and accurate. I think that's a real component of this industry. And I think anyone pursuing anything, there's a lot of no's that we get, a lot of doors closed in our faces. So yeah, this has been my journey for the last 13, 14 years. And this debut novel is just very exciting to have finally arrived after so many rejections. Yeah, so that's a little bit about what I've been writing and what I've been doing the last 15 years or so. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, it seems to me that, in addition to learning about your craft and developing your interest as a writer and all of that, you really do need to develop a really strong sense of resilience because there
Yeah.
is a lot of rejection built into the process. And, that can scare a lot of people away, I imagine.
Yeah, it almost scared me away, honestly. It takes a lot of tenacity, a lot of thick skin, and it's okay. I always say, like, it's okay to nurse your wounds. It's okay to feel upset, and then to compartmentalize. And then I always found writing through any rejection, working on something, always having something that I was writing really helped me just continue to move forward and persevere.
So I'm curious about the inception point for this novel. As we said, it is your debut novel in publication, but I noticed on your website that there is a story that features Eddie, at least in the title. So is that story the source for the novel?
So interestingly enough, the novel started out as a collection of short stories, and they were all focused on the same character of Etty Bloom, and they weren't in chronological order in any way, but they would center on different aspects of her life. So I had a short story about Etty's father and Etty's mother, Etty's daughter, Etty's son, Etty's husband. And while I was working on this collection of short stories, I did submit one of them, and it was published by the Jewish Literary Journal. So that short story did make it out in the world pretty early on in the drafts of this manuscript. So I think one of the stories was published before I even finished the entire collection. And it became about 12 short stories. And that was the first attempt in submitting this book. So it was first originally formatted this way, and I sent it out. And short stories are a hard sell also. So things weren't working. No one was saying that the writing was bad or anything. I wasn't getting that kind of feedback, but I was being told that this wasn't working for different agents for different reasons. And then I had hired a developmental editor to take a look and tell me what I could maybe do to make it a little bit more marketable and appealable. So her feedback was pretty small, but a huge undertaking. And she was like, well, get this out of short story form, and I want you to put it in chronological order from start to finish. And this was like much larger of a task than it appears, because within each short story, the short stories themselves were not in chronological order. And then within each short story, I had flashbacks or even flash forwards to different moments in Etty's life. And I had to sit down and sort of just like sift through it and pull out bits and pieces and begin to create an elongated story that went from start to finish of a chronological life. And that became what the book is now. And I think it was the best piece of advice. It was a small, but just an immaculately perceptive feedback for what needed to happen to make this book what it needed to be. So that is why there is a short story that is out there that already features Etty. And that chapter, I think, has been changed at this point. It's really morphed into something a little bit different, but it's fun that there's a little piece of that that's out there.
Yeah, it's a nice little bit of literary archaeology. You can see.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of Eddie, can you talk about shaping her character, particularly because we do experience her entire life, and really over a lifetime, we are several different people.
Yeah.
So when you're approaching portraying an entire life like that, how do you balance the continuity of character so the person feels like the same person, but also, honoring the immense changes that a person goes through in a lifetime?
Yeah. I think what's interesting about that is that when I first wrote the collection of short stories, I was in my late 20s. But by the time I sat down to write this lifetime of Ati from start to finish, I was already in my mid to late 30s. And I think that that really informed the writing for me and how I handled these moments, because I had now another 10 years of experiences, and I was able to reflect on small moments in my own life. Like you said, we're not the same people we were. I hope I'm not the same person I was when I was a teenager or a young girl, or even who I was in my 20s. And this actually allowed me to really focus and hone in on particular experiences in Etty's life that started to impact her. And those were the scenes I sort of slowed down and spent time with, to explore what was happening in that moment, so that the reader and myself could understand and absorb how she was changing as a person. And we still have cores of who we are. I had to always be paying attention and honor who she was authentically, and consistently, but also how she was changing, either because she was becoming more mature or sophisticated, or maybe alternatively because something happened to her that was upsetting or traumatic, and how that shaped her and it might have changed her or hardened her or softened her in any way. And I found that really exciting to like sort of slow down certain moments of her life and explore how that impacted her.
Yeah, it is very internal. You experience everything that she experiences with her, but it also has this very evocative setting of Hasidic Williamsburg over time. And I think that, portraying the environment so richly and how the environment also shifts and your relationship with it can also be part of that journey. So can you talk
Yeah.
about portraying, especially post World War II? Williamsburg, 1949 it is when Etty is born, right? So yeah, can you talk about like how her context in both time and place, shape her life and her upbringing too?
Yeah, absolutely. Etty came to me originally as a middle-aged woman. And I wrote her in present time as a middle-aged woman. And then as I did that, I was like, wait a second, if I'm going back to the beginning of her life, I've now landed myself in post World War II. And that was a little exciting too, to explore different time periods. And I think that when you live in insulated communities, the community itself is as much a character in the book as Etty is. And I have grown up in Orthodox communities, and I've also had my own interactions with the Hasidic community. My own family on my father's side is a Hasidic lineage. So I wanted to explore how the community itself changes and matures or reacts to time. And my own grandparents, they were Holocaust survivors, and that really impacted my upbringing. There wasn't a situation that came up in which we weren't reflective about their experiences, and that was really important for me. Like I knew as soon as I realized that Etty would have been born when she was, that her parents were going to be survivors. And it gave me an opportunity to also explore some of my father, who is the son of my grandparents who were Holocaust survivors, to explore what that impact is like, what experiences those individuals had. And having grown up around many Holocaust survivors, it really became an important second narrative to what was taking place in the book and how it impacts Etty herself to have grown up in the shadow of that kind of trauma. And then what that means for the community. And there's all these little moments of passage of time where, certain things are coming up in the community that's changing the community or how they react or how they're responding. So I think when you're dealing with something that takes place over such a vast amount of time, you have to pay attention to both the character and the environment, because both things are changing with time. So that was an exciting part for me to incorporate, especially because I feel like a lot of times stories that take place within the Hasidic community are often only focusing on negative attributes. And I wanted to have the opportunity to explore some of the humanity that's contained within these communities that I think are often overlooked. And there's still a lot of beauty in this way of life, even if it feels foreign to many. And that was a nice opportunity to explore on the page as well.
Mm. Yeah, I spent my early and mid 20s in Williamsburg, which is
Oh, okay.
a common experience for millennial New Yorkers. And I became so interested in my neighbors and getting to observe holidays and traditions that I did not have exposure to, back on Long Island. And it was so lovely to see it represented in a book and in such a rich, multi-sensory way, because like when you are brought inside the home in this book, you really are like you smell the foods that are cooking and you hear the prayers and like it's very immersive.
Oh, I love hearing that. Thank you. That's rewarding. When I wrote Etty, even though our upbringings weren't exactly the same, I didn't grow up in the same kind of Hasidic community that Etty did, but there is such a powerful sense of love inside these observant homes. And I really was hoping to translate that onto the page, what it's like to sit at a Shabbat dinner, what's taking place in that dining room, the sounds and the smells and the conversation. And it's so natural to me since I grew up with it, but I really was hoping to translate that onto the page. So I'm glad that it did.
Yeah. So I'm really curious about the process of finding the story in a life because I think I've said this a couple times on this podcast, but like that's not really something that we are privy to in our own lives. Like we don't really get to find
Yeah.
out the meaning of our own story. But that's the nice part about being an author is that you can't imagine other people's lives that way and give it like a narrative arc and a meaning. So can you talk about finding her journey? I'm really curious and perhaps how Eddie's sense of ambition is perhaps driven by her upbringing too, of this sense of like, my parents survived and I am here. I have to make something of my life.
Yeah. Part of the journey of capturing her whole life, I think it was easier for me to enter since I originally did write this as short stories. And then I think the true exploration for me was when I took these stories and I started weaving them into one transitional narrative. And you have to inhabit such different areas of this character's life. And I have to remember what it's like to be a young girl. I have 4 children right now, thank God, at home with me, keeping me very busy. And there's a lot of insight into the daily lives of a toddler when I was writing this, to a young girl, to a teenager. So that inspiration was like very present and prevalent in my home actively while I was writing those different areas of Etty's life. And then bringing her in from young adulthood into middle age, that was something that I could reflect on more recently. And even though Etty and I are very different people, very different people, I think a lot of internal reflection helps the writer to inform the character and infuse very real moments. And even though those might not have been my specific experiences, so long as I was able to tap into and reflect on what it was like to be in my 20s or what it's like to get married at a young age, and then maybe sort of try to inhabit the space of somebody who's in an even more insulated community than I'm in, and absorb, like sort of observe what might be happening internally, allowed me to sort of bring this character step by step into who she is. And it really was a big undertaking. And I think that what's so funny to me is when you sit down to write like this brawling novel, you don't sit down and think about all of it all at once. It's very gradual, and it happens very naturally that as you're writing, that the next moment presents itself and you're like, oh, well, this just happened to Etty, so it makes sense that this feels what's going to happen now. And it's almost like she was leading me along this journey of her life. And I think that as I wrote her, she really did age. Like I felt like I was watching her age before me as I was writing each progressive chapter, so that it didn't feel so daunting to get her from 8 years old to 80 years old. So that progression happens just smoothly and gradually in a way that she slowly just presented herself in these different stages. Hopefully that answered the question that we might have lost a little bit.
It does. Yes, thank you. Yeah, because it's really lovely and I think it's resonant that like she is also looking for her story too. Like that's part of what we're all doing on this planet,
Yeah.
And there's something really beautiful and I think comforting in the way that her her outcomes don't always match her imagination or her ambitions. She experiences loss and grief and downturns, as well as great moments of joy and happiness and connection. And I think that there's like a nice, like, not paradox, but like a little bit of it's just like a lovely thing, I think, is that like when we are looking for the big meaning of things, we're going to find them like in these smaller moments.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that comes back to that original point about ordinary lives. Most of us are not going to be celebrities or remarkable. And I think that we are always exposed to the most remarkable of people. And that's sort of our role models or our setup, and we're constantly exploring those stories. And I feel like the greater stories that are out there are the ones of the ordinary lives that are lived, and how beautiful those are, and the moments that are contained in those ordinary lives that contain such I don't know, like unadulterated joy and beauty that's so natural that I don't think gets explored enough. And some books, they want to, different genres, whatever it might be, it's that wow factor, it's that plot. There is no plot here in the book. We just follow along this regular life. And for me personally, I found that lovely and fascinating and rewarding, and to remind ourselves that our lives contain extraordinary moments within the ordinary ones.
Absolutely. And I think it is a needed and perhaps comforting message for the particular times that we live in, which are very, I'm going to sound so old, I apologize, but with the social media and influencers, I think
Yeah.
that we live in a society that is like oriented around external validation, and like the more people who see your success validates your success even more. And so what I walked
Yeah.
away from this was an idea that like a moment doesn't need to be observed in order to be important or meaningful or life-changing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And there were so many of those moments in this book, and especially because you mentioned she has these aspirations or she has these expectations, and they don't go the way that she wants them to, but she still finds joy in the unexpected events of her life, even in the disappointing ones. And I think that that's something that we could all benefit from internalizing, and how to retrain our minds to understand our own narratives, that something that might seem upsetting or disappointing, perhaps inside it there is something of value, or perhaps it happened because something else amazing is going to happen as a result. And that's really what Etty is about. And she's not a perfect person by any means. She's a very flawed character, which has a whole other conversation. But I think that that's also something that was important was, what about the unlikable people, the people that we find that we don't particularly resonate with or enjoy, but they also contain shame and guilt and sadness and joy and aspirations. And I wanted to explore that within this character who is often a bit of an anti-hero in the book, and to sort of, give insight into what might be laying into people's private lives.
That is really interesting. And that is very moving, I think, here too. Because Etty does have a lot to offer. She does create a lot of her own issues.
Yes, she
But
does.
yeah.
She's a bit of a drama queen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that's also a nice observation about life is that, like for the most part, we're all always trying to be better and we don't always succeed. But like, and also in that journey of trying to be better, like you're going to fail and you will be a hypocrite in those moments, and that's all part of the overall journey.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And those were some of the scenes in which I was trying to get into Etty's subconscious, and some of her thoughts are uncomfortable, and it felt hard for me to write them, but I wanted to inhabit spaces of honest humanity. And there are moments in which we are not always great or, sincere, or doing the right thing. And I wanted to explore all of those components of what it means to be human.
Yeah. And I think when you have such unfettered access to a character's inner thoughts like that, we can perhaps become hypocrites ourselves a little bit too, because like we can choose to ignore our own, less generous or like less kind
Yes.
thoughts. But we're confronting Etty's on the page. And then in doing that, we are also confronting, our own. And so like part of, I think,
Yeah.
the frustration that we feel with her is at ourselves as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. The reflectiveness of our own faults, and poor qualities. I haven't really considered that in that way. But yeah, I think that that is something that's maybe makes it hard to read some of these moments. I had some readers who were like, oh my gosh, I was like cringing, or I had secondhand embarrassment at certain moments. And I was like, yeah, probably because there's an honesty to it.
Yeah.
Moments in which we ourselves feel internally cringed by something that we might think, but no one gets, like you said, access to that. But here we have no choice but to acknowledge it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very powerful way of making yourself process some things that perhaps you don't want to process is through fiction.
Yes, yes, yeah. And I think that that was something that felt just really important to me, to be honestly representative of this character. Even if at times I disagreed with her or felt uncomfortable by what she was thinking, I felt the necessity to be completely transparent with what it means to be alive, and often that does not always contain our most admirable moments.
Yeah. Yeah, it is messy and it's cringy. Life is very cringy
Yeah,
and it's embarrassing.
it's all there.
Yeah. Well, this was such a lovely book, and it was so lovely to get to read it and talk about it with you. What is next for you? I mean, I know you're busy and you're traveling and all that, but are you writing right now?
Yeah, it's so funny because I spend summers home with my children. So it's a very busy summer trying to balance entertaining them, keeping them and busy and going to the beach and going to the pool or whatever it is. And then I have these little moments where I'm just like, please don't talk to me. Mommy needs to do this right now. So yeah, I'm definitely always working on something. I am finishing up another novel and polishing that up. It's a very different narrative than ETTY BLOOM, but still explores similar themes of what it means to be human. And I also have a collection of poetry that I'm polishing up and finishing up as well. So I'm always writing. I don't know how to not write. So it is a busy time. It's exciting to be sharing this book with everybody. But there's always work in the background that's being taken, some time too.
Great. Well, I can't wait to see what's next. And, I thank you for coming to join us, sharing your book and your time with me.
Thank you for having me.
Very welcome. And thank you, listeners, for joining us. Please check out The Very Unremarkable Life of Mrs. ETTY BLOOM. It's absolutely beautiful and it is available now. It will be available when you hear this. So please head to your favorite bookstore or library or website, wherever you like to go for your books. Do you have a favorite bookstore that you like to send people to for books?
So I do have a favorite bookstore. I'm glad you asked. Secret World Books in Highland Park in Illinois, Chicago, is owned by Gail Brandeis and her husband. Gail is an award-winning writer, and she was my mentor in my MFA program. And she has the most eclectic, beautiful little bookstore, and it's filled with little, oh my gosh, it's like filled with magic. There's books there, and there's eccentricities there. There's all sorts of stuff. So that would be my favorite bookstore. But I'm also very grateful to both Lofty Pigeon Books in Brooklyn, as well as Book Soup in LA, both places that are hosting events of mine or have hosted. Those are great bookstores. And I'm always rooting for the indie bookstores. So head there before you head to any other major retailers.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Independent bookstores are our allies in the world of getting books into people's hands. So I always like to give them a little shout out. So thank you.
Oh, I love that. Of
All
course.
right. And thank you again, listeners. It is now time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.